An absolute hell bomb of drama has just detonated in the Helldivers 2 community. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the channel. And yes, this is about the railgun. But it's not really the railgun itself. It's what the railgun was actually solving. And, well, it was the reliable solution to heavily armored enemies, to chargers and to bile titans. Of course, we're all fighting the terminids at the moment, so just forget about the automatons. But yeah, you could reliably destroy chargers, reliably destroy bile titans. This meant that as harder difficulty missions progressed, you would not get swamped by these enemies. However, nerfing the railgun means that you do now get swamped by these enemies at the end of missions. And the game, well, it's drastically changed because of that. And is that a good or a bad thing? Well, let's break this down. The railgun nerf was a good thing. If you can't deal with armored enemies without a railgun, you don't deserve it. And this has been posted by a bile titan and a charger. So there's two camps, right? There's two trains of thought here in action inside the Helldivers 2 community. And what you've got is basically camp A is you just need to get good, right? Whatever the railgun's nerfed, there are other ways of destroying these enemies. You just need to deal with it. And then the other camp is, well, actually, the nerfs have destroyed the only option to really win reliably on higher difficulties. Now, the devs have come in and the devs have said, use stratagems at higher levels, or, well, just use stratagems in general. Have varied loadouts, you know, work together as a team better, all of this stuff. And I think what was happening was the railgun was you kind of, it was just the, I mean, I never liked the railgun. I'll be totally honest. I don't even like the railgun anyway. I prefer the auto cannon. It's a much better, much more interesting weapon to use, right? Even the laser cannon is more fun to use now. It's been buffed, although it's not the answer to heavy armor that the railgun was. But the railgun was just reliable. One Helldiver could just, you know, deal with the bile titan, deal with the charger. If you had two railguns in your team, it was even faster. Three, it was even faster. You know, you get where I'm going with this. So it was almost like an afterthought. These giant enemies, these heavily armored enemies, were not really that much of a threat because there was a solution to them. Now, before we get into this video, the other train of thought in the camp B, I guess, is why didn't they just buff other weapons to the level of the railgun? Then that would actually have reduced the usage of the railgun in time, because, you know, imagine if the auto cannon became more effective against these heavily armored enemies, or the laser cannon was more effective, or they came up with different ways of balancing the heavy armor on these enemies, different ways of actually removing the heavy armor. Yeah, maybe it absorbs damage, but it actually gets depleted and then falls off, and then you can start hitting the soft underbelly of whatever bug you're trying to kill. So there's a lot of ways of looking at this. But anyway, let's break this down, because there's some insane stuff here. Like, literally one of the devs comes in as well. This meme from Reddit, I think, sums it up, because they've quoted the balance post from the developers and highlighted you need to rely on your stratagems. Then they're like, divers be like, you need to rely on your stratagems, and then a load of mission modifiers. And yeah, so this is one of the issues, right? And it's caused this kind of like debate of, are the devs actually playing the game at harder difficulties? Because when you start going into 7, 8 and 9, you get mission modifiers, and obviously the higher the difficulty, the more of these modifiers you get. And these modifiers can do things like, well, you can see there, you know, 100% cooldown time on stratagems. I mean, so that's just way less stratagems per mission. You get ones that just mess up the targeting of the stratagems. It's just loads and loads of these effects, and they make using stratagems to deal with things like bile titans or chargers a lot less reliable. And even then, the only ones that would reliably deal with them would be the orbital rail cannon. Now, that would hit, I mean, it would take 2 shots sometimes to take out a bile titan or even a charger. But, like, that requires coordination from somebody else on the team. But the other weapons, things like the 500 kilogram bomb, can work if it lands. Most of the time, it won't land in the right area. And if you can't use them as often as you could before, then obviously you've got less chance of killing these massive enemies. And that's why you end up with loads of these enemies at the end of a mission. Like this screenshot I've taken from Reddit. Now, I haven't seen it this extreme in games that I've played, but there's been 2 bile titans at the end and loads of charges, like more charges than I can count. But I've never seen 5. I mean, that's crazy. But again, this is most likely because this squad were just running from objective to objective to objective, and then when they need to extract, obviously you need to stay still in that location while the shuttle comes down to pick you up, and you're just getting swamped, and all you're doing is kiting around. You're not actually fighting the enemies, and that's, I think, is the issue. I'm going to say a lot of people have, and it's definitely the issue I'm having, is that you actually want to fight these enemies, not run away from them. you know, and if you don't have the firepower to deal with them, it's quite frustrating. So let's talk about Camp A and what they would think. So these are the people that are very much in the mindset of you just need to get good. And yeah, you know, I think I'm also in that camp a little bit. You do need to get good. We do need to get better at killing these things. Remember, the game is in early. It's only the first few weeks of the game. There may be a time where people learn to, as soon as, let's say, a Bile Titan spawns, everybody focus fires it. We're running underneath it. We've worked out how to deal with it. We're destroying it, probably even with primary weapons or something insane. You know, so there is a world where that exists. But obviously, what's happening at the moment is the shock of these enemies are feeling very oppressive because you just can't get rid of them. At least you can't get rid of them fast. Actually, it's kind of funny because the flamethrower is really effective against the charger, but it's just, well, he just kills you. And if you're flaming down a charger, you can't really get out of the way of the charger if it wants to charge you. And also, if there's loads of other enemies, you just end up getting, it's crazy. Basically, the flamethrower is not the answer to the charger. But it might be if you had other support from your team, which I think is what the devs are trying to get at. Anyway, look at this post. So it says the first balance patch notes proved how YouTube absolutely and only meta loadouts cooked a lot of people's heads, and I love it. Now, the thing I want to take away from this post is the quote that he sort of makes up. You guys nerfed the only good options, and now we have nothing left to fight. Yeah, and then goes on to say this is because people are just relying on ultimate support weapon tier list YouTube videos and stuff like that. And this, again, is a valid point, you know. These you do get a lot of gamers in this day and age that just look up guides and then just follow the guide and that's it, and they don't really think of any other way of playing the game. And Helldivers does give you on paper a lot of different options to deal with the different situations you find yourself in. But as I said, I just think a lot of this is coming from the shock of Railgun, which, like I've said, guys, I'm not even a fan of the Railgun, but the Railgun being this weapon which could reliably defeat heavy armor and being sort of the only weapon that could do it. Yeah, you can use the recoilless rifle as well, but it's obviously not as effective because you're having to reload after every shot. You don't have as much firepower with you. You know, you can't fire as often. So you know, they're not one-for-one changes almost. But yeah, this is a completely valid way of thinking. So let's take a look at what the dev said. Now, this is where things get crazy. So I would say here, I can understand this. I can absolutely understand what this dev is doing because I have found myself in this situation quite a few times. So if I make a video or whatever and somebody goes at me, attacks me, or if I make a tweet or whatever, right, you do actually want to defend yourself. And you might get thousands and thousands of positive comments, but that negative comment, it really erodes away in your mind. And it can be there for weeks as well. It's really annoying, especially if somebody attacks something that you've made. So I can understand this dev going out there and just like trying to tell people what they think. And yeah, now I will say it's never a good idea as a developer to go onto Reddit full stop, but also to go into Reddit posts that are discussing balance changes, because if you've spent weeks working on these changes, they are going to get ripped apart. Even if they're the best change ever seen, somebody will just annihilate them and it will do your head in. Anyway, this dev goes in and does exactly that. So maybe, I don't know, this is a symptom of Arrowhead needing a bit more in the way of community management or something. I don't know. But honestly, I do like to see devs react like humans as well. I don't just want robots that don't ever communicate, because that's crap. You know, so yeah, pros and cons. But anyway, this is what the dev says. I'm feeding the rage a little for my own entertainment here, just so you know. We haven't nerfed anything into the ground. I just think it's a little too early to pretend like the game is figured out. We made two of the most brainless play styles less viable. So, I mean, that's the first issue there, isn't it? He's called his player base brainless, which is not great. And brought the guns that are underperforming, overperforming more into line with the rest. The game is only a couple of weeks old, so before we start making sweeping changes, we want everyone roughly where we intended from the start. That doesn't mean we won't bring things up when we know more about how players play the game. Now, or how people play the game. So the problem here is, he's called his player base brainless, which isn't great. But, you know, I would have called the Railgun shield backpack strap brainless. It is brainless. You know, where is the strategy there? You're just using a weapon. Look at it this way. You're using a tool to defeat a problem, and it's the best tool for the job. That's it. But its application is very easy. It's almost brainless. You know, you're not having to like run around on the Bile Titans and try and expose their weak spots or any of that. No, you just shoot at them from range in the head and they die. You know, it's like, okay, it is brainless. I get what he is saying there, but it's just, you can't really say that if you're a developer of the game, because people will take it the wrong way. Now, the other issue here is the idea of bringing powerful weapons down to the level of other weapons instead of bringing the other weapons up to the level of the powerful weapon, which might have actually solved the problem that they've got. That is, they don't want people using the railgun and the shield backpack. If other weapons had, you know, other sort of ways of dealing with heavy armor, let's say the autocannon can strip armor, or, you know, the laser cannon can burn off heavy armor, then as I said before, you can like sort of access the soft underbelly of the mobs. Maybe that would be a better way of doing this instead of nerfing, but yeah, this is the path the devs have gone down. This dev also comes back a few hours later, probably has been told by the company and by PR and, you know, community management, you can't call the player base brainless. You best get in there and apologize. And says this: that was me. I went a little too far with the trolling, but what I said, I said. I'm sorry if people took offense to it. I'm not going to engage with the community anymore, since as many people have pointed out, we have a community team that should handle that. I figured I'd have a little fun with the players, but I realized being a dev, I'm in an unfair position. Maybe this isn't going to mend anything with you, but at least I feel I should own up to it and apologize. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, sad that this dev's not going to interact anymore with the community, but a bit of a odd situation all round, I think. So what about Camp B? So this is the other sort of side of the discussion, and I want to highlight an absolutely incredible post over on Reddit. And I think I agree with this 100%. I actually agree with this 100%. So the post says, balancing around the meta is pointless if the devs don't understand why the meta exists. And the user Super J makes one of the best Reddit replies I've ever seen. It's so good. So they quote this message: the railgun breaker meta developed almost solely due to chargers and bile titans. And look, as soon as the balance changes dropped, posts about how fast a flamethrower can kill a charger started making their way to the top of the sub. Yes. However, listen to this. Exactly. I've been saying this a lot today, and it got through to at least one person, which is basically a Diff 9 victory in itself, so I guess I should retire. Nerfing the railgun is fine. That is not the problem. It's the symptom. The actual problem is the game's over-reliance on spamming heavies in mass numbers. There's so many options to try and address that problem that would genuinely free up players from feeling they had to rely on the railgun and make other weapons more viable. But instead of trying any of those, they just nerf the tools that players use to solve that problem, which doesn't actually address the problem itself. It just offloads the responsibility for fixing it onto the player base by forcing them to change how they play, which is understandably frustrating for a lot of players. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that statement. It's just true. And they have the right idea in the sense that build diversity is a laudable goal, but forcing it by nerfing effective tools can leave the game in a bad place. Buffing all the underperformers has its own issues too. We should have and enjoy using a variety of tools for different situations, but nerfing the few tools that currently work for those situations just makes everything mediocre, which, yes, that's build diversity, but now everything is generic and interchangeable, so it's a pretty boring way to get there. Why not instead change the parameters of these scenarios to make more tools more viable? Which is where charger spam comes in. As the biggest factor in driving the over-reliance on the railgun, chargers have few options for counterplay and feel overtuned for how numerous they can get. So yes, players relied on the railgun to address that excessive and unbalanced threat. But even a minor change to the charger experience could work wonders here, and then the situation that causes the over-reliance on the railgun stops pushing players into choosing that single tool and frees up more options while making the game more fun. Nerfing the single solution while leaving the problem unaddressed doesn't make for a very enjoyable game. And I want to expand on this one because, you know, you think of the way the game spawns enemies at the moment, specifically Terminids. So when you play on the harder difficulty, so 7 and above, and even, you know, you still get charges spawning on other difficulties, but you get a lot of charges spawning, right? If they change the composition of what was spawning, so if charges maybe spawned only 50% as much as they did, but they like 100% increase the spawn rates of some of the medium enemies, then the railgun wouldn't be as effective. You know, you'd be thinking, okay, a railgun gets us out of a scenario when there's a charger, but there's much less charges, there's way more of the other enemy types. We need, you know, better weapons, support weapons that can deal with the sort of AoE threat of these enemies. So there are a lot of other ways they could have gone around this, but instead they just went straight in and got rid of the railgun, but kept the charges spawning as they are. And this is like, you're just getting flooded. It's like, oh my God, how do we deal with these now? Because you don't really have the, the OP tool that was dealing with them in the past. Now, there is a caveat here, right? Exosuits are coming to the game. Could exosuits, be the answer to this? Is this entire thing, this balance pass, to do with the fact that exosuits are really powerful and they're sort of gearing up for that? But I would also say to that, you're essentially just turning the exosuit into the new railgun, if that's true. Again, this is speculative on my part, but yeah, you would just be like, okay, we need an exosuit now. Everyone needs exosuits. If you don't bring them to any mission above 7 difficulty, then you're just not playing in the game. You just can't do anything. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And finally, Super J finishes with the fact that they're apparently looking at win percentages and other numerical merits and Liberty Forbid YouTube videos, comparing weapons to one another rather than getting a more nuanced and broader understanding of the underlying factors driving the usage of those weapons isn't exactly encouraging. Now, I don't entirely agree with that. I did say I agree with the entire comment earlier, but I think that's what they're trying to do when they're taking all these different elements, your YouTube videos, probably like your TikTok videos as well, community reaction. They're looking at stats, they're looking at win percentages, and they're making changes based on that. I think that is nuanced. It's just sort of like they've maybe come to the wrong conclusion. I think that's probably a better way of looking at it. Anyway, then goes on to say, and then kicking the can down the road by saying this is the first of many balance patches is a bit disappointing too. It's cool that the game will eventually include improvements, but that promise of better fixes someday doesn't do much to keep it enjoyable here and now. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. The big question here is, should they have even have nerfed these weapons? Like, we were in a situation where, yeah, railgun was just used against all, it was just used all the time. The breaker was the best primary weapon. Everybody ran the breaker. I ran the breaker, but the breaker felt really good to use because, as its name suggests, it broke Terminids in half when you shot them. It was awesome seeing the limbs and everything all explode. So I didn't really care about that. But the railgun, yeah, it did trivialize some of the harder enemies. But what is the answer to those enemies with the current stuff we've got available? You can't rely on stratagems if you're playing on higher difficulty, because there'll be effects that will reduce the effectiveness of your stratagem. Mission effects, that is. So it's like, I don't know, it's really odd. The question here is, do you think the game would have just been better if they just left it how it was? Or if they just buffed all the other weapons up to the level of the railgun? Or, like I sort of discussed and touched on, what happens if they just changed up the way enemies were spawning? And instead of flooding us with high armor enemies, they maybe looked at flooding us with different types of enemies? Because that'd still make it difficult. You'd need a lot of, a higher volume of fire. And maybe that is the answer here, because it feels better. In fact, I'm just going to end the video on a rant myself. It feels better using the heavy machine gun, just blasting that into waves of Terminids, even though it's not effective against, heavy armored targets and whatnot. It feels awesome when you're just, like, absolutely holding down the trigger. Why isn't there a minigun in this game, actually, as well? But, like, you're just holding down the trigger and annihilating all the targets. That feels incredible, and that's the feeling they've got to keep in this game. Because if they keep nerfing stuff and that goes away, it's going to be a problem. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Stylosa. I thank you for watching the video, and I'll catch you lovely lot on the next one. See you soon.